The night my mate chose another woman, I felt our child kick for the first time. I stood in the shadows of the great hall, my hand pressed against my belly, while the man I loved announced to our entire pack that I was no longer worthy of standing beside him. I remember the silence first, the way it spread through the gathering like frost creeping across a window, stealing the warmth from every face, every breath. Kyle stood on the raised platform where we had spoken our bonding vows 3 winters ago, his silver eyes catching the firelight as he addressed his people with the voice that once whispered promises against my skin. Beside him stood Serena, her dark hair cascading over shoulders draped in ceremonial white, her hand resting on his arm with the confidence of someone who had already won a battle I never knew we were fighting. I had come to the gathering to tell him about the baby. For weeks I had carried the secret like a precious stone hidden in my palm, waiting for the right moment, the perfect night when the moon was full, and his duties as alpha would quiet enough to let him simply be mine. I had imagined his face softening, his strong hands reaching for me, the way he might press his ear to my stomach and listen for the heartbeat of our future. I had been so foolish, so blind. Kyle's voice carried across the hall with the authority that had made him alpha at 23, the youngest leader the Shadow Silver clan had known in 6 generations. He spoke of tradition and strength, of bloodlines and the future of our people. He spoke of difficult decisions that leaders must make for the good of all. And then he spoke of me. He called me barren. He said I had failed to give him an heir in 3 years of bonding, that my womb was as empty as the promises my family had made when they offered me to him. He said that Serena, daughter of the Eastern Ridge Alpha, carried the fertility blessing of her ancestors, that their union would secure alliances and ensure the continuation of his line. He said he was releasing me from our bond with honor, that I would be provided for, that I should be grateful for the years I had spent at his side. Grateful. The word lodged in my chest like a splinter of ice. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to that platform and tear Serena away from him, to force him to look at me, to see me, to feel the life growing inside me that proved every word he spoke was a lie. But my legs would not move. My voice had abandoned me. I stood frozen among my former pack members, watching their eyes slide away from mine, watching them shift their bodies to create distance between us, as if my disgrace was a disease they might catch. Only later would I understand that this was not a sudden decision. The whispers had been building for months, the careful maneuvering of wolves who wanted Serena in my place and were willing to poison Kale's mind to achieve it. They had told him I was cold, distant, that I spent too much time in the forest gathering herbs when I should be fulfilling my duties as his mate. They had told him that Serena was warm and willing, that she gazed at him with worship in her eyes, that she would give him strong sons with silver fur and golden eyes. They never told him that I went to the forest because I could feel something calling me there, a pull in my blood that I could not explain. They never told him that I was learning the old healing arts from the village women because I wanted to serve our pack in ways beyond producing heirs. They never told him that I loved him with every breath in my body, that I would have died for him, that I was carrying his child. Perhaps I should have spoken. Perhaps I should have found my voice in that terrible moment and declared the truth before everyone. But something held me back, some instinct older than thought, some whisper in the deepest part of my soul that said this child was no longer his to claim. If he did not want me, he did not deserve to know what grew inside me. If he could stand before our people and call me barren while his baby fluttered beneath my heart, then he had already proven himself unworthy of fatherhood. So I stayed silent. I let them strip away my ceremonial collar, the twisted silver that marked me as Alpha's mate. I let them take the ring from my finger, the one Kale had placed there himself on our bonding night, promising forever. I let them lead me from the great hall, while Serena smiled her victorious smile, and the pack that had been my family for 3 years looked through me as if I had already ceased to exist. They gave me until dawn to gather my belongings. A small mercy, they called it, time to collect myself before I was escorted to the border of our territory. I walked through the village in a daze, my feet carrying me along paths I had traveled 1,000 times, past the healing house where I had learned to stitch wounds and brew fever tea, past the nursery where I had dreamed of one day bringing my own children, past the Alpha's cabin where I had slept in Kale's arms and believed I was safe. The cabin was empty when I entered. Kale would spend this night with Serena, beginning their new bond while the old one still bled inside me. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching objects that no longer belonged to me, memorizing the shape of a life I was being forced to leave behind. I packed only what I could carry on my back: a change of clothes, my mother's journal, the small pouch of herbs I had gathered last autumn, a knife with a bone handle that had been my grandmother's. Everything else I left for Serena, hoping she would choke on the happiness she had stolen. I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the moon cross the sky, my hands cradling my belly, whispering to the child who could not yet hear me. I told my baby that we would survive this. I told my baby that we did not need a pack, did not need an alpha, did not need anyone who could look at us and see nothing worth keeping. I told my baby that somewhere in this world there was a place for us, and I would find it even if I had to walk to the edge of existence to do so. When the first gray light touched the mountains, they came for me. 4 wolves I had once considered friends, now unable to meet my eyes as they escorted me through the village one last time. The path they chose led not toward the southern border where allied packs might take me in, nor toward the eastern valleys where human settlements dotted the landscape. They led me north toward the dark line of trees that had haunted my dreams since childhood, the forest of white bones, the forbidden territory, the place where wolves went to die. I stopped walking when I realized their intention. The lead escort, a male named Torin, who had once helped me birth a difficult litter of pups, finally looked at me with something like shame in his golden eyes. He said that Kale had ordered it. He said that I was being given a choice: the forest or the cliff, exile or death. He said that some of the elders had argued for mercy, for sending me south where I might find another pack, but Serena had whispered in Kale's ear, and Kale had decreed that I must never be allowed to return, that I must be sent somewhere no one would ever find me. They expected me to beg. I could see it in their faces, the way they braced themselves for tears and pleas and desperate bargaining. But something had changed inside me during that long night of watching the moon. The Elara who would have collapsed at Kale's feet and begged for another chance had died in the great hall along with her bond. The woman who stood before these escorts now was someone new, someone carved from grief and forged in betrayal, someone who would not give them the satisfaction of her fear. I turned toward the forest and started walking. Behind me, I heard Torin call my name, heard the confusion in his voice, the uncertainty. They had prepared for screaming, not silence. They had prepared for resistance, not acceptance. They did not know what to do with a woman who walked toward her death with her shoulders straight and her chin raised and her hand resting on the swell of life in her belly. The trees swallowed me before they could decide whether to follow. I do not know how long I walked that first day. The forest was darker than I had imagined, the canopy so thick that only scattered fragments of light reached the ground, creating pools of gold and green amid the endless shadow. The air smelled of pine and decay, of snow and something else, something wild and ancient that made the hair rise on my arms. I kept waiting for the fear to come, the terror that surely must accompany a death sentence, but my body seemed to have forgotten how to be afraid. There was only the rhythm of my footsteps, the sound of my breath, the steady awareness of the child growing inside me. By afternoon, I had stopped pretending I knew where I was going. The forest had no paths, no markers, nothing to guide a lost wolf toward safety or doom. I walked until my legs ached and my back screamed for rest, until the light began to fade and the temperature dropped from cold to cruel. I knew I should stop, should find shelter, should build a fire if I could manage it with numb fingers and limited supplies. But some force kept pushing me forward, some instinct that whispered just a little further, just over the next rise, just past the next stand of ancient pines. The snow began as I climbed a ridge I had no memory of choosing. Soft at first, fat flakes that caught in my hair and melted on my cheeks like tears I refused to shed. Then harder, faster, the wind rising to drive the ice into my skin, stealing my breath, blinding my eyes. I stumbled. I fell. I dragged myself up and fell again, and this time my body refused to rise. I lay in the snow and felt the cold seeping into my bones, numbing the pain, quieting the chaos in my mind. Perhaps this was mercy, I thought. Perhaps this was the fate the forest offered to those who entered its domain. A gentle freezing, a slow surrender, an end to grief and betrayal and broken promises. I closed my eyes and let the white silence wash over me. The last thing I expected was warmth. It came as a pressure against my side, a solid heat that cut through the cold like a blade through frost. I forced my eyes open and found myself staring into a face that should have terrified me, but instead filled me with a calm I could not explain. A wolf, massive and white as the snow that fell around us, lay beside me with her body curved against mine. Her eyes were the color of honey in sunlight, bright and ancient and impossibly knowing. She watched me without fear, without aggression, with something that looked almost like recognition. I should have screamed. I should have scrambled away. Should have remembered every story I had ever heard about the white wolves of the forbidden forest. The beasts that answered to no alpha. The creatures that killed any wolf foolish enough to enter their territory. But the warmth of her body was spreading through me, chasing the deathly chill from my limbs, and the child in my belly had gone still and quiet, as if listening to a voice only the unborn could hear. The white wolf made a sound, low and soft, more like a mother's croon than the growl of a predator. She nudged my shoulder with her great head, urging me to move, to rise, to follow. When I did not respond quickly enough, she stood and took the edge of my cloak gently in her jaws, tugging with patient insistence. I do not know where the strength came from, but I found myself climbing to my feet, found myself leaning against the wolf's solid flank, found myself walking when I had been certain I would never walk again. She led me through the storm, her white fur making her nearly invisible against the driving snow, only the gold of her eyes marking the path forward. We climbed and descended and climbed again, the wind howling around us like the voices of the dead, until at last the wolf stopped before a darkness that yawned in the face of the mountain. A cave. Small and deep, sheltered from the storm, the ground covered with dried grass and leaves, as if someone had prepared it for exactly this moment. The white wolf guided me inside, and the sudden absence of wind felt like stepping from a nightmare into a dream. She curled herself around me as I collapsed onto the soft ground, her body a wall of warmth against the cold that tried to follow us in. I lay there shaking, not from fear, but from the impossibility of what was happening. The white wolves killed intruders. Everyone knew this. The bones that gave the forest its name were proof enough. The scattered remains of those who had tried to cross this territory and paid the ultimate price. Yet, here I was, cradled against the chest of a creature who should have torn out my throat, feeling safer than I had felt in months. My hand found her fur, soft and thick and warm beyond reason. She allowed the touch, even leaned into it, a rumble of contentment vibrating through her massive frame. The sound reminded me of something, some half-forgotten memory of my grandmother humming as she braided my hair, my mother's voice singing me to sleep when I was small and the world was simple and safe. I did not understand how a wolf could carry such comfort in her voice, but I was too exhausted to question it. Sleep took me before I could fight it, dragging me down into a darkness that felt like drowning. And in that darkness, I dreamed. I dreamed of a woman standing at the mouth of a cave, her hair as white as the wolf's fur, her eyes the same impossible gold. She wore a cloak made of silver pelts and a crown of antlers wound with winter roses, and when she looked at me, I felt the weight of generations pressing down on my shoulders. She spoke without moving her lips, her voice echoing through my skull like the ringing of a great bell. "You have come home," she said. "You have been lost for so long, daughter of my blood. But the forest has called you back. The old ways wait for you. The old power sleeps in your veins. Your child will carry the mark of the white wolves, and through that child, the balance will be restored." I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to demand explanations for the words that made no sense, but the dream was already dissolving around me, the woman's face fading into mist and moonlight. I reached for her, and my hands closed on nothing but cold air. I woke to find the storm had passed. Pale sunlight streamed through the cave entrance, painting the walls with gold, and the white wolf was gone. For a long moment I lay there staring at the ceiling of stone, trying to convince myself that everything had been a fever dream. The wolf, the warmth, the woman with the crown of antlers. But the fur still clung to my cloak where the wolf had pressed against me, and the child in my belly was moving again. Not the flutter I had felt before, but something stronger, something insistent, as if trying to tell me that everything had changed. I pulled myself to sitting and looked around the cave with clearer eyes. What I had thought was simply dried grass and leaves was something more. A deliberate arrangement that could only have been made by human hands or something with human intelligence. Patterns in the dried plants, spirals and circles that tugged at my memory without quite coming into focus. And there, at the back of the cave where the darkness gathered deepest, I could just make out shapes carved into the stone. Wolves. Women. Wolves and women together. Their forms intertwined in ways that suggested not predator and prey, but something else entirely. I crawled toward the carvings, driven by a curiosity stronger than my lingering weakness. The stone was smooth beneath my fingers, worn by time and touch, and as I traced the outlines of the ancient images, I felt a tingling in my blood, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. The child kicked again, harder this time, and I gasped with the force of it. That was when I heard the footsteps outside the cave. Heavy and deliberate, crunching through the snow with the confidence of something that had no need to hide its approach. I pressed myself against the wall, my hand finding the knife at my belt, my heart pounding with the first real fear I had felt since entering the forest. The white wolf had saved me from the storm, but I knew better than to assume all the forest's creatures would show such mercy. A shadow fell across the cave entrance, blocking the light. And then I saw him. He was a wolf, but not like any wolf I had ever encountered. Massive, larger even than the female who had saved me, his fur not pure white but silver touched with shadow, as if moonlight and darkness had woven themselves together to create his coat. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle and shoulders, old wounds that spoke of battles survived and enemies defeated. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. They were not the gold of the female wolf. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, the color of steel, the color of something ancient and terrible and impossibly sad. He looked at me across the length of the cave, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was the alpha of the white wolves. This was the creature whose territory I had entered, whose mate had saved me from death, whose judgment would decide whether I lived to see another sunrise. I should have bowed my head in submission. I should have shown my throat, acknowledged his dominance, begged for permission to remain in his domain. Instead, I met his eyes and refused to look away. Something passed between us in that moment, something I could not name but felt in the marrow of my bones. Recognition, perhaps, though I had never seen this wolf before. Understanding, though we had exchanged no words. The great wolf held my gaze for what felt like hours, his scarred face giving nothing away, his massive body still as carved stone. Then, Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head. Not in threat, not in preparation to attack, in greeting, in acknowledgement, in something that looked almost like respect. The female wolf appeared beside him, pressing her white shoulder against his silver flank, her golden eyes bright with what I could have sworn was amusement. She made that low crooning sound again, and the male wolf stepped aside, allowing the pale morning light to flood back into the cave. Together, the two wolves turned and walked into the forest, pausing at the edge of the trees to look back at me. The message was clear. Follow. I gathered my meager belongings with shaking hands, wrapped my cloak tighter against the cold, and stepped out of the cave into a world that had been transformed overnight. The storm had left everything blanketed in pristine white. The trees bowed under the weight of snow, the sky above so blue it hurt to look at. The air was sharp and clean, filling my lungs with each breath, making me feel more awake and alive than I had in months. The wolves waited at the tree line, patient as stone. When I reached them, the female fell into step beside me, matching her pace to mine, while the silver male ranged ahead, his scarred form appearing and disappearing among the snow-laden pines like a ghost. We walked for hours through terrain that should have been impassable, over frozen streams and through drifts that reached my waist. But somehow my feet always found solid ground, and the cold that should have numbed me barely penetrated my cloak. By late afternoon, we emerged from the dense forest into a valley I had never seen on any map, never heard described in any story. It stretched before me like something from a dream, a bowl of white and green cradled between protective mountains, a frozen lake glittering at its center like a fallen mirror. And on the far shore of that lake, I could see structures, buildings that were neither entirely human nor entirely wolf, constructed from stone and living trees woven together in patterns that defied explanation. The white wolf pressed against my leg, urging me forward, down the slope toward whatever waited below. And as I took my first step into the valley that would become my sanctuary, I felt the child in my belly shift and settle, felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the pale winter sun. I had been sent here to die. I had been cast out and abandoned, stripped of my bond and my home and my place in the world. But as I looked down at the impossible valley and the wolves who had chosen to guide me rather than kill me, I understood that my story was not ending. It was only beginning. The valley held its breath as I descended, as if the very land was waiting to see what I would do, who I would become. I had spent my entire life believing I understood what I was, a wolf of the Shadow Silver clan, a healer's apprentice, a mate, a woman whose value was measured by her ability to produce heirs for an alpha who never deserved her loyalty. Now, walking between two wolves who should have been my executioners, I felt those old definitions crumbling like ice in spring, revealing something underneath that I was only beginning to glimpse. The structures grew clearer as we approached the frozen lake. They were not buildings in any sense I recognized, not the timber lodges of my former pack or the stone fortresses I had heard existed in the Eastern Territories. These were something older, something that had grown rather than been constructed, great trees shaped by patient hands over generations until their living trunks formed walls and their interwoven branches became roofs. Stone foundations anchored them to the earth, carved with the same spiraling patterns I had seen in the cave. And everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of the white wolves, paw prints preserved in ancient concrete, fur caught on bark worn smooth by countless passing bodies, the lingering scent of something wild and sacred. The female wolf led me to the largest of the tree structures, a towering edifice that must have taken centuries to shape. Its entrance was an archway formed by two trees that had grown together, their trunks twisting around each other like lovers frozen mid-embrace. Beyond the archway lay a space that defied my expectations, warm despite the winter cold, lit by some source I could not identify, filled with objects and furnishings that spoke of human habitation, yet felt entirely at home in this wild place. I stood at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. The wolves had brought me here, but they had not told me what I was meant to do. what was expected of me, whether I had any right to enter a sanctuary that clearly belonged to something far greater than a discarded mate fleeing her shame. The silver male had disappeared into the forest again, his scarred form melting into the shadows as if he had never been, leaving me alone with the female wolf and my swirling questions. She nudged me forward, her great head pressing against my hip with gentle insistence. When I still hesitated, she made a sound that was almost impatient, almost amused, and walked past me into the tree hall, as if to demonstrate that there was nothing to fear. Her white fur seemed to glow in the strange interior light, a beacon drawing me toward whatever waited inside. I followed her, because I had no other choice, because some part of me needed to understand why I was still alive when I should have been dead, because the child in my belly was pulling me forward with an urgency that matched the wolf's. The interior of the tree hall was larger than it appeared from outside, a single vast space divided by hanging weavings and standing screens into areas that suggested different purposes. There was a hearth at the center, a great circle of fitted stones surrounding a fire that burned without apparent fuel, its flames the soft gold of autumn leaves rather than the orange of ordinary fire. Around the hearth were cushions and furs arranged for sitting, and beyond them I could see shelves carved into the living wood, filled with books and jars and objects I could not identify. The air smelled of herbs and wood smoke and something else, something that reminded me of my grandmother's cabin, a scent I had not encountered since her death when I was 12 years old. The white wolf settled herself on a cushion near the fire, her golden eyes following me as I moved through the space in a daze of wonder. I touched the spines of books written in languages I did not recognize, ran my fingers over jars filled with dried plants and powders and liquids that shimmered with their own inner light. I found a mirror framed in antler and silver, and when I looked into it, I barely recognized the woman who stared back at me. She was gaunt and hollow-eyed, her dark hair tangled and wild, her skin pale from cold and exhaustion. But there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, a spark of something fierce and determined, the first glimmer of the fire that would eventually consume everything she had been and forge her into something new. I turned from the mirror and found myself facing a tapestry that hung from ceiling to floor, dominating the far wall of the great hall. It was old, older than anything I had ever seen, its threads faded but still holding the ghost of colors that must once have been brilliant. The image it depicted made me stop breathing. A woman stood at the center of the weaving, her hair as white as snow, her eyes golden as honey, her form draped in silver furs. Around her gathered wolves, dozens of them, their bodies arranged in a pattern that suggested both protection and worship. The woman's hands were raised, and from her palms flowed light that spread across the tapestry like water, touching the wolves, touching the trees that bordered the scene, touching a figure I had not noticed at first, a man who knelt before her with his head bowed. On the woman's brow sat a crown of antlers wound with roses, and beneath her feet was a symbol I recognized with a shock that nearly sent me to my knees. It was the same symbol my grandmother had worn on a pendant around her neck, the same symbol that had been carved into the headboard of my childhood bed, the same symbol that appeared in my mother's journal in the margins of pages I had never been able to read. A circle containing two crescents, one facing up and one facing down, with a star at the center where they met. I had asked my grandmother about the symbol once, when I was very young and curious about everything. She had looked at me with eyes that held secrets I would not understand for decades, and she had told me that it was a mark of our family, a reminder of who we had been before we forgot. When I asked what we had forgotten, she smiled and said that someday, when I was ready, the answer would find me. I had not understood. I had grown up and put the question aside, distracted by the demands of pack life, by my training as a healer, by my bonding to Kale, and my duties as Alpha's mate. I had forgotten my grandmother's cryptic words, forgotten the symbol, forgotten everything except the narrow path I thought my life was meant to follow. Now, standing before this ancient tapestry in a sanctuary I should never have found, I understood that forgetting had been a kind of death, and remembering was the first step toward resurrection. The white wolf rose from her cushion and came to stand beside me, her warm flank pressing against my leg. She looked up at the tapestry with an expression that seemed almost reverent, then turned her golden gaze to my face. I felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing, a question and an answer all at once. "You know who she is," I whispered, my voice hoarse from disuse and cold and the tears I had refused to shed. "You know who I am." The wolf did not answer, could not answer in words, but she leaned into me and made that low crooning sound, and I felt the truth settle into my bones with the weight of mountains. The woman in the tapestry was my ancestor. The wolves in this valley were the descendants of her companions. And I, the discarded mate of an arrogant alpha, the pregnant exile left to die in the forbidden forest, was the last of a bloodline that had guarded the boundary between human and wild for longer than written history could record. I sank to my knees before the tapestry, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I was beginning to understand. The white wolf curled around me, her body a warm barrier against the cold floor, and I let myself weep for the first time since Kale had spoken the words that ended my old life. I wept for the grandmother who had tried to tell me the truth and died before she could finish. I wept for the mother I barely remembered, who had disappeared when I was 4 and been declared dead by a pack that never searched for her. I wept for the years I had spent trying to be something small and acceptable, trying to fit into a role that was never meant for me, trying to love a man who saw me as nothing more than a vessel for his legacy. And I wept for the child growing inside me, the child who would be born into a world that had no idea what was coming, the child who carried in their blood the power of the white wolves and the burden of an ancient calling. The fire burned on, its golden flames dancing in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost meaningful. I watched it through my tears and felt something shifting deep inside me, some locked door beginning to open, some sleeping power beginning to stir. The child kicked again, and this time I felt the echo of it in my chest, in my throat, in the tips of my fingers. My body was changing, had been changing since I entered the forest, and I understood now that this was not illness or weakness but awakening. I do not know how long I knelt there, lost in grief and revelation. When I finally lifted my head, the light through the woven ceiling had shifted from pale gold to deep amber, and my body ached with a hunger I had been too overwhelmed to notice. The white wolf had not moved from her place beside me, her patient presence a comfort I had not known I needed. "There is food here," I said. Not really a question, but not quite a statement either. Something about this place made me trust it, made me believe that whatever I needed would be provided. The wolf rose and walked toward one of the divided areas, pushing aside a hanging curtain with her great head to reveal a space that was clearly meant for preparation of meals. There were stores here, dried meat and preserved fruit and grains in sealed containers, enough to last one person through several winters. There was a spring that bubbled up through the stone floor, its water clear and cold and tasting of minerals from deep in the earth. There were tools for cooking and eating, simple but well made, worn smooth by years of use. I ate like an animal, tearing into the dried meat with my teeth, washing it down with handfuls of the spring water, stuffing preserved berries into my mouth until juice ran down my chin. The white wolf watched me without judgment, her golden eyes calm and patient. And when I finally stopped eating, she led me to another divided space where a bed waited, piled with furs and blankets that looked softer than anything I had slept on in months. I should stay awake, I told her, even as my body was already moving toward the bed. I should try to understand what this place is. I should figure out what I am supposed to do. But the wolf simply pushed me toward the furs with her great head, and my exhausted body could not resist. I fell into the bed like falling into water, the warmth of the furs wrapping around me, and sleep took me before I could form another coherent thought. The dreams came again that night, but they were different from the single vision I had experienced in the cave. These dreams were a flood, a torrent of images and voices and sensations that poured through my sleeping mind like water breaking through a dam. I saw the woman from the tapestry, but younger, standing at the edge of a cliff as the moon rose full and white above her. I saw wolves running through forests that no longer existed, their howls carrying messages across distances that should have been impossible. I saw women with silver hair and golden eyes, generations of them, each one passing something to the next, a flame that burned without consuming, a power that grew stronger with each transfer. I saw my grandmother, young and fierce in a way I had never imagined, fighting off attackers with nothing but her bare hands and a fury that made the air itself seem to catch fire. I saw my mother, her face the one I barely remembered, standing at the edge of the forbidden forest with tears streaming down her cheeks, looking back at something I could not see, whispering words I could not hear. I saw myself as a child, sleeping in my bed with the carved symbol on the headboard, while a figure made of moonlight stood watch at my window. And I saw Kale, but not the Kale I had known as my mate. A different Kale, younger, standing before a council of elders as they debated something in hushed and urgent tones. I saw Serena there too, her dark eyes fixed on Kale with a hunger that had nothing to do with love, her lips moving as she whispered in the ear of an old man I recognized as Kale's father, the former Alpha who had died 2 years into our bonding. I could not hear what she said, but I saw the old man's face change, saw him look at Kale with something that might have been fear, saw him nod slowly as if agreeing to something terrible. The dream shifted, and I was in a room I had never seen, a chamber of stone deep underground, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on walls covered with writing. Kale's father stood before an altar of black stone, and on the altar lay a bundle wrapped in white fur. He was speaking, chanting, his voice rising and falling in rhythms that made my sleeping blood run cold. And as I watched, the bundle began to glow with a sickly green light, and the old man's face twisted into an expression of triumph that made my stomach turn. "They made a bargain," a voice said, and I knew without seeing that it was the white-haired woman from the tapestry, my ancestor, speaking from somewhere beyond the veil of dreams. Kale's father traded his bloodline's honor for power, and his son has inherited the debt. The one who whispers in your mate's ear is the collection agent, sent to ensure the terms are fulfilled. She will not rest until the bargain is complete. "What bargain?" I tried to ask, but my voice would not work in the dream, and the images were already dissolving around me. The woman's voice followed me toward waking. "You were not cast out because you were barren, daughter. You were cast out because they knew what you are, and they fear what your child will become. The betrayal was not chance, but design. And the revenge will not be yours alone, but the forests, the wolves, the land itself rising to reclaim what was stolen." I woke with the first light of dawn filtering through the woven ceiling, my heart pounding, my skin damp with sweat despite the warmth of the furs. The white wolf was curled at the foot of my bed, her golden eyes already open and watching me with that patient, knowing gaze. For a long moment I lay still, trying to process what I had seen, trying to separate dream from vision from whatever deeper truth was trying to reach me through the chaos of sleep. The bargain, the whispers, the green light on the altar, and the triumph on the face of a dead man. None of it made complete sense yet, but I could feel the shape of it forming in my mind, pieces of a puzzle I had not known existed beginning to find their places. Kale had not simply chosen another woman over me. He had been manipulated, perhaps from before we ever met, pushed toward this outcome by forces that saw me as a threat to something I did not yet understand. Serena was not merely an ambitious rival, but an agent of something darker, something that had been working against my bloodline for generations. And my exile to the Forbidden Forest, My supposed death sentence had been meant to eliminate not just me but the child I carried, the heir to a power that someone desperately wanted to remain forgotten. The anger came then, cold and clean and clarifying. Not the hot rage of betrayal I had felt in the Great Hall, not the desperate grief of a woman losing everything she loved. This was something older, something deeper, a fury inherited from the generations of women who had come before me, who had protected this land and its creatures from those who would exploit them, who had stood against darkness again and never surrendered. I sat up in the bed, and the white wolf raised her head, her golden eyes reflecting the pale morning light. "I need to know everything," I told her, my voice steady for the first time since I entered the forest. "I need to understand what I am, what my family was, what they are so afraid of. I need to know what bargain was made and how to break it. And I need to become strong enough to make them regret every choice that led to this moment." The wolf rose and stretched, her great body unfolding with a grace that belied her size. She walked to the entrance of the sleeping area and looked back at me, the same patient invitation she had offered since the beginning. This time, I understood what she was asking. I climbed out of the firs and followed her through the tree hall, past the tapestry of my ancestor, past the fire that still burned without fuel, out into the valley that sparkled with fresh snow under the rising sun. The female wolf led me across the frozen lake, its ice thick enough to hold us both without creaking, toward the far shore where I could see more structures nestled against the mountain's base. As we walked, I became aware of movement in the trees around us. Wolves, white and silver and pale gray, emerging from the forest to pace alongside us at a distance. There were dozens of them, more wolves than I had ever seen in one place, their golden and amber and gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that should have been frightening, but instead felt like recognition. They were not hunting. They were witnessing. The female wolf led me to a cave at the base of the highest cliff, an opening much larger than the one where I had spent my first night. Runes were carved into the stone around its mouth, the same spiraling patterns I had seen throughout the valley, and from deep inside came a glow that shifted between gold and silver, like the heartbeat of something ancient and powerful. I looked at the white wolf, and she looked back at me, and I understood that this was the moment of choice. I could stay in the valley and hide, let my child be born in safety, live out my days as a refugee in this forgotten place. Or I could enter the cave and claim the heritage that had been hidden from me, accept the power and the responsibility, become what my bloodline had been bred to become over countless generations. The child kicked inside me, and I felt again that echo in my chest and throat and fingertips, the stirring of something that had been sleeping for far too long. I walked into the cave. The light surrounded me immediately, warm and welcoming, guiding my feet along a path worn smooth by centuries of passage. The cave walls were covered with paintings and carvings, images of women and wolves and transformations I could not quite comprehend, a history written in pictures for those who knew how to read them. I followed the path deeper and deeper into the mountain, the light growing brighter with each step, until I emerged into a chamber that stole my breath and my doubt and every last remnant of the woman I had been before. It was a cathedral of stone and crystal, a vast space that must have taken millennia to form. Stalactites and stalagmites meeting in pillars that seemed to support the weight of the mountain itself. At the center of the chamber was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid silver, and rising from the pool was a stone altar on which rested a single object. A crown of antlers wound with white roses that should have withered centuries ago, but still bloomed as if freshly picked. The white wolf had followed me in, and now she walked past me to the edge of the pool, her reflection perfect in the still water. She looked back at me one more time, then stepped into the pool and began to change. I watched, frozen in wonder, as her white fur seemed to melt into her skin, as her body shifted and rose, as the wolf became something else entirely. The transformation took only moments, and when it was complete, a woman stood before me in the pool, water lapping at her waist, her hair as white as the fur had been, her eyes still golden and ancient and impossibly knowing. She smiled at me, and it was the same smile I had seen in my dreams, the same smile that had watched over me from the tapestry in the tree hall. "Welcome home, daughter of my blood," she said, and her voice was the voice from my dreams, the voice that had told me the truth about Kale's bargain, the voice that had been guiding me since before I knew I was lost. "You have much to learn, and not much time to learn it. The winter will protect you for now, but when the snow melts and the pass is clear, they will come looking for confirmation of your death. We must make sure that when they find you, they find something they never expected." She reached for the crown on the altar and lifted it from its resting place, and the roses seemed to bloom brighter at her touch, filling the cave with a perfume that made me dizzy with its sweetness. "This belonged to my mother," she said, "and hers before her, all the way back to the first of our line. It has been waiting for you since before you were born. But you cannot wear it yet. The crown is not a gift but a burden, and you must prove yourself worthy of carrying it before it will accept you." She set the crown back on the altar and stepped out of the pool, her body wrapped in a glow that might have been clothing or might have been light itself. When she reached me, she took my face in her hands and looked into my eyes with an intensity that seemed to see through to my soul. "I am Elara," she said, "the last guardian before you, though I have not walked in human form for many generations. The wolves are my children now, and they will be your teachers. Through them you will learn what your body can become. Through the sacred texts in the tree hall you will learn what your mind can do. And through the child growing inside you, you will learn what your heart is capable of, both its love and its wrath." She released my face and stepped back, and I saw something in her golden eyes that might have been pride or might have been sorrow. "Your grandmother was meant to bring you here when you came of age," she continued. "But she was killed before she could fulfill that duty, murdered by agents of the same darkness that now wears your former mate's face. Your mother tried to complete the task, but she too was taken, stolen away before she could pass the knowledge to you. You are the last, Elara, the last of our blood in the world beyond this valley. If you fail, if you fall, the line ends and the bargain your enemies have worked toward for generations will finally be complete." I wanted to ask what the bargain was, what they were trying to achieve, why my bloodline was so important that they would kill to end it. But Elara was already changing again, her human form dissolving back into the white wolf who had saved me from the storm, guided me through the forest, brought me to this place of power and revelation. The wolf looked at me one last time, golden eyes full of something that transcended the boundary between human and animal. Then she turned and walked out of the cave, leaving me alone with the altar and the crown and the weight of everything I had just learned. I stood there for a long time, staring at the crown of antlers and roses, thinking about grandmothers and mothers and daughters, about bargains made in darkness and debts collected through generations of suffering. I thought about Kale, who might be a villain or might be a victim, manipulated by forces he did not understand. I thought about Serena, whose hungry eyes suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. I thought about the child in my belly, who carried a heritage they had not chosen and a destiny they could not escape. And I thought about myself, about the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming, about the weakness I had mistaken for virtue and the strength I had not known I possessed. When I finally walked out of the cave, the sun had set and the stars had emerged in a sky so clear and dark that it seemed I could see forever. The wolves were waiting for me, dozens of them arranged in a great circle on the snow-covered ground, their eyes reflecting the starlight like scattered constellations. At the center of the circle stood Elara in her wolf form, and beside her was the great scarred male who had greeted me on my first morning in the valley. I walked into the circle and felt the power gathering around me, the ancient magic of this place rising to meet something equally ancient in my blood. The child kicked, and the wolves lifted their voices in a howl that seemed to shake the very mountains. I threw back my head and howled with them, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to belong. The training would be brutal, the revelations would be devastating, and the reckoning that waited at the end of winter would test everything I was and everything I would become. But in that moment, surrounded by the wolves who had claimed me as their own, I was not afraid. I was finally awake. Winter taught me what summer never could, that survival is not about avoiding pain but learning to carry it. The weeks that followed my initiation into the circle of wolves were the hardest of my life. Harder than the betrayal, harder than the exile, harder than the frozen night when I had been ready to let the snow take me. But they were also the weeks when I finally began to understand what I was capable of, and that understanding changed everything. Elara came to me each day at dawn, sometimes in her wolf form, and sometimes wearing the shape of a woman, depending on what lesson she intended to teach. In her human form, she was stern and demanding, pushing me to memorize the ancient texts that lined the shelves of the tree hall, to trace the meanings hidden in the spiral carvings, to understand the history of my bloodline and the responsibilities that came with it. In her wolf form, she was patient but relentless, leading me through the frozen forest until my legs burned and my lungs screamed, teaching me to move through snow and ice and darkness as if I had been born to it. The other wolves participated in my training as well, each one offering something different. The great scarred male, whose name I learned was Fenris, taught me to fight, or rather taught me that fighting was not about strength or speed, but about understanding your enemy so completely that you could anticipate their movements before they made them. He would stalk me through the valley, appearing from nowhere to knock me down, vanishing before I could respond, until I learned to sense him coming, to feel the shift in the air that preceded his attacks. It took weeks before I could avoid his strikes, months before I could counter them. But when I finally landed a blow that made him stumble, the pride in his storm-gray eyes was worth every bruise I had accumulated. The younger wolves taught me to hunt, to track prey through snow and forest, to read the stories written in footprints and broken branches, and the scent trails that hung invisible in the winter air. I had never hunted before, had never needed to, had always relied on the kills brought home by stronger wolves while I tended to my healing herbs and my domestic duties. Now I learned that there was power in the hunt, a connection to something primal and essential that had been bred out of pack wolves over generations of comfortable settlement. The first time I brought down a deer on my own, running it to exhaustion through a frozen meadow and ending its life with a single clean strike, I wept with a mixture of grief and triumph that I could not have explained to anyone who had not felt it. But the most important lessons came not from the wolves, but from my own body, from the changes that accelerated as winter deepened and my pregnancy advanced. The child grew quickly, far more quickly than any pregnancy I had witnessed in my years as a healer's apprentice, and with that growth came transformations I had not anticipated. My senses sharpened until I could hear a rabbit's heartbeat from 50 paces, until I could smell the approach of a storm hours before the first clouds appeared. My strength increased beyond anything natural, allowing me to climb cliffs and ford icy streams that should have been impassable. And something stirred in my blood, a heat that had nothing to do with temperature, a power that built with each passing day like pressure behind a dam. Elara watched these changes with careful attention, adjusting my training as my abilities emerged. She explained that the child I carried was awakening gifts that had lain dormant in my bloodline, that the combination of my heritage and the father's alpha blood was creating something unprecedented. The guardians of old had always been powerful, she told me, but their power had been earned through decades of study and practice. Mine was being forced to the surface by the presence of the baby, compressed into months what should have taken years. And that compression came with dangers she could not entirely predict. I asked her once what would happen if the power grew too quickly, if my body could not contain what was building inside me. She looked at me with those ancient golden eyes and said that some vessels shattered under pressure, while others transformed into something stronger. She said that my grandmother had been one of the strongest vessels their line had ever produced, that my mother had shown signs of being even stronger, and that she believed I had inherited the best of both of them. But she also said that belief was not certainty, and that I would need to be careful, would need to learn control before the power learned to control me. The dreams continued through those winter months, coming almost every night now, showing me fragments of the past and glimpses of what might be the future. I saw the woman with the antler crown standing before armies of wolves and men, negotiating peace between species that had warred for centuries. I saw my grandmother as a young woman, receiving the mark of the guardian in a ritual that left her screaming but emerged transformed. Her ordinary brown eyes turned to gold. I saw my mother running through darkness, clutching a bundle to her chest, looking back over her shoulder at pursuers I could not see. And I saw Kale. The dreams of him were the hardest to bear, because they showed me things I had not wanted to know, truths I had not been ready to face. I saw him as a child, watching his father perform dark rituals in underground chambers, his young face twisted with fear and confusion. I saw him as a young man, arguing with elders who insisted that certain traditions must be maintained no matter the cost. I saw him on the night of our bonding, standing alone in the forest before the ceremony, his hands shaking as he whispered words I could not hear to something I could not see. The Kale in my dreams was not the monster I had made him in my waking hours. He was a man caught between forces he did not understand, manipulated from childhood by a father who had sold his bloodline for power, and a woman who had been placed in his path to ensure he never escaped. He had loved me, the dreams seemed to say. He had chosen me against the wishes of those who controlled him, had fought for 3 years to protect me from a fate they had already determined. And in the end, he had been broken, his will crushed by magic and manipulation until he spoke the words that cast me out. This did not excuse him. Nothing could excuse the public humiliation, the lies about my barrenness, the sentence of death disguised as exile. But it complicated my anger, turned the pure flame of hatred into something murkier and more difficult to hold. I found myself wondering if he knew what had been done to him, if some part of him was fighting even now against the forces that had claimed his soul. I found myself wondering if there was anything left of the man I had loved, or if that man had been an illusion from the beginning. Elara sensed my conflict and addressed it directly during one of our evening lessons in the tree hall. She sat across from me beside the eternal fire, her white hair gleaming in its golden light, her golden eyes reflecting flames that never died. "The alpha who cast you out is not innocent," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Whatever forces shaped him, he made choices. He could have questioned the whispers in his ear. He could have investigated the claims against you. He could have remembered the woman he married and trusted what he knew of her rather than what others told him. He did none of these things because it was easier not to, because the path they laid before him was smooth, and the path of truth was thorny. That is not possession but weakness, and weakness in a leader is its own kind of evil." I told her that I understood, that I was not trying to forgive him, only to comprehend. She nodded slowly and said that comprehension was necessary for what lay ahead, that I would need to understand my enemy if I hoped to defeat them, but that I should never confuse understanding with absolution. The man who had wronged me would face consequences for his choices, she said. The question was not whether justice would come, but what form it would take and who would deliver it. I asked her then about the bargain, the one she had mentioned in my first vision, the deal that Kale's father had made in exchange for power. She was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire as if reading something in its dancing flames. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "Long ago," she began, "before your pack existed, before any of the modern clans had formed, there was only one law that governed the relationship between wolves and the land. The guardians maintained the balance. We stood between the wild world and the world of civilization, ensuring that neither consumed the other. In exchange for this service, we were granted long life, great power, and the loyalty of the White Wolves, who answered to no alpha but served the Guardians alone. She paused, her golden eyes growing distant. But there were always those who coveted what we had. Alphas who believed they deserved our power, our longevity, our connection to the ancient magic of the forest. Most were content to envy from a distance, knowing that challenging a guardian meant facing the wrath of the White Wolves and the land itself. But some were bolder. Some were willing to make bargains with darker powers to achieve what they could not earn. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter outside. You were saying that Kale's father made such a bargain. Elara nodded slowly. 3 generations ago, the alpha of what would become the Shadow Silver clan sought out a witch who dealt in forbidden magic. He wanted the power of the Guardians without the responsibility, wanted to rule his pack with absolute authority, wanted his line to endure forever. The witch could not give him what he asked for, but she offered him something else. She offered to destroy the Guardians instead. My breath caught in my throat. How? By severing our bloodline, Elara said simply. The power of the Guardians passes through the female line, from mother to daughter, an unbroken chain stretching back to the first woman who made the covenant with the wild. If that chain is broken, if the last guardian dies without passing on her gifts, the covenant dissolves. The White Wolves will scatter, becoming ordinary beasts. The sacred places will lose their power, and the land itself will weaken, becoming vulnerable to those who wish to exploit it. I thought of my grandmother, murdered before she could complete my training. I thought of my mother, stolen away when I was too young to remember her face. I thought of myself, exiled to die in the forbidden forest with a child in my belly who represented the continuation of everything they were trying to destroy. They have been hunting my family for 3 generations, I said, the horror of it settling into my bones. Every death, every disappearance, it was all part of this. Elara reached across the space between us and took my hands in hers. Her skin was warm, warmer than any human skin should be, pulsing with a heat that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than flesh. Your grandmother was powerful enough to hide you from them for years, she said. When they finally found her, she fought them off long enough for your mother to escape with you. Your mother brought you to the edge of this forest, hoping to reach the sanctuary, but they caught her before she could complete the journey. She gave you to a passing traitor, a human who knew nothing of our world, and told him to deliver you to the nearest wolf pack. She hoped they would raise you ignorant of your heritage, that you would be safe as long as you did not know what you were. Tears were streaming down my face, but I did not try to stop them. My mother sacrificed herself for me. She died fighting, Elara confirmed. I felt it, even from within the valley. The death of a guardian leaves a wound in the world that never fully heals. When I felt your mother fall, I sent the wolves to search for you, but you had already been taken in by the Shadow Silver clan. You were a child in the Alpha's household, protected by your own ignorance. We could not reach you without revealing what you were. So you waited, I said, understanding dawning. You waited until they cast me out, until they sent me into the forest themselves. We waited for the forest to call you home, Elara agreed. And when you entered our territory, dying in the snow with your child fighting to survive, we were ready. The irony is not lost on me that the very people who have worked for generations to destroy our bloodline are the ones who finally delivered you to us. I pulled my hands from hers and stood, walking to the entrance of the tree hall, staring out at the valley that had become my sanctuary. The moon was rising over the mountains, full and white and impossibly beautiful, casting silver light across the snow. Somewhere out there, beyond the peaks that protected this hidden place, the Shadow Silver clan was going about its business. Kale was sleeping in his bed with Serena at his side, and everyone who had watched me walk into exile believed I was dead. They will come looking eventually, I said without turning around. When spring comes, they will send scouts to confirm my death, Elara came to stand beside me, her presence warm against the winter chill. Yes. And when they do, they will find something they never expected. I looked at her, at this woman who had been waiting centuries for someone like me, who had preserved the knowledge and power of the Guardians through generation after generation of solitude and patience. "What will they find?" I asked. She smiled, and in that smile I saw the fierce joy of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "They will find the Alpha Queen," she said, "and her army of white wolves, and the reckoning they have been running from since the first bargain was struck in darkness." The winter deepened, and so did my transformation. By the time the longest night arrived, I could run with the wolves without exhaustion, could hunt and fight and survive in conditions that would have killed me months before. My belly had grown round and heavy with the child who would be born before spring, and the power in my blood had grown with it until I could feel it thrumming beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. Elara taught me to channel that power, to direct it rather than simply containing it. I learned to sense the health of the forest, to feel the heartbeats of every creature within a mile of where I stood. I learned to speak to the wolves not in words, but in impressions, images, and emotions that cross the boundary between species. I learned to call the white wolves to me, to send them ranging through the territory with my thoughts, to see through their eyes when my own were not enough. And I learned to change. The first transformation came without warning, on a night when the moon was dark and I was sitting alone by the pool in the crystal cave. I had been meditating, trying to connect with the power that Elara had described as the heartbeat of the land, when suddenly my body erupted in pain unlike anything I had experienced. My bones shifted, my muscles tore and reformed. My skin seemed to split and heal in the same impossible moment. I screamed, or tried to scream, but the sound that emerged from my throat was not human. When the pain subsided, I found myself standing on 4 legs, my body covered in fur as white as fresh snow. I stumbled to the edge of the pool and looked at my reflection, and the golden eyes that stared back at me were my own, and yet utterly transformed. I was a wolf. Not the gray or brown wolves of the settled packs, not even the silver of Fenris or the pure white of Elara. I was something different, something that had not been seen in generations. My fur shimmered with an inner light, as if moonlight had been woven into every strand. My eyes glowed with a power that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, and around my neck, visible even in wolf form, was a marking that made my breath catch. The crown of antlers wound with roses, etched in silver fur against the white. Elara found me there, still staring at my reflection, still trying to understand what had happened. She changed into her wolf form and came to stand beside me, her shoulder pressing against mine, her voice entering my mind in the wordless way I had learned to recognize. "The transformation comes to all guardians," she said, "but I have never seen one manifest so quickly or so completely. The child is accelerating everything, pushing your body to adapt in ways that should have taken years. This is a gift, Elara, but also a danger. The transformation consumes enormous energy, and the child takes energy too. You must be careful not to exhaust yourself before the birth." I asked her, in that same wordless way, if the baby was in danger. She was quiet for a long moment before responding. "The child is strong," she finally said, "stronger than any I have felt in centuries. Whatever happens, the baby will survive. It is you I am worried about." The winter solstice brought a ceremony I had not expected. As the longest night reached its deepest dark, the wolves gathered in the crystal cave, filling the great space with their bodies and their power. Elara changed into her human form and dressed in robes I had not seen before, silver and white and embroidered with symbols that seemed to shift and move in the strange light. She led me to the pool at the center of the cave and bid me stand in the water, which was warm despite the winter cold, pulsing with the same energy I felt in my own blood. The wolves began to howl, a sound that built and built until it seemed to fill the entire mountain, until I could feel it vibrating in my bones. Elara raised her hands and began to speak in a language I did not know but somehow understood. Words of binding and blessing and ancient promises renewed. The power rose through the water and into my body, filling me until I thought I would burst, transforming me in ways I could not see but could feel in every cell. The child kicked furiously, responding to the magic that surrounded us, and I felt something pass between us, a connection that went beyond the physical bond of mother and child. In that moment, I knew my baby's soul, knew the fierce determination and the ancient wisdom that already lived within that tiny, unborn form. The ceremony ended as the first gray light of dawn touched the mountains. Elara took my hands and looked into my eyes, and I saw tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "You are ready," she said. "When spring comes and the enemy arrives, you will face them as a true guardian, but there is one more thing you must know before that day comes." She led me from the cave and across the valley to a structure I had not entered before. A small building made entirely of stone, nestled against the cliff face as if trying to hide from the world. Inside was a single room, empty except for a mirror that covered the entire far wall. "This is the seeing glass," Elara said. "It shows what is happening in the world beyond our valley, but only when asked directly, and only if the one asking has the blood of the guardians. I have used it rarely, because the knowledge it provides comes with a cost. But I think you need to see what has become of the pack that cast you out." She stepped back, leaving me alone before the mirror. I hesitated, suddenly afraid of what I might find. The winter had been a cocoon, a protected space where I could transform without worrying about the outside world. Now that cocoon was about to tear, and I was not sure I was ready to face what waited on the other side. But I had not come this far to be ruled by fear. I stepped forward and placed my palm against the surface of the mirror, and immediately the reflection changed. Instead of my own face, I saw the great hall of the Shadow Silver clan, the same hall where I had been humiliated and cast out. But it was different now. The decorations darker, the atmosphere heavier, the faces of the wolves who gathered there drawn with exhaustion and fear. Kyle sat on the Alpha's throne, but he looked nothing like the proud leader who had pronounced my exile. He was gaunt, his silver eyes hollow, his body hunched as if carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Beside him sat Serena, and I felt my blood turn to ice when I saw her. She was pregnant, her belly round beneath a gown of blood red. But there was something wrong with the pregnancy, something unnatural in the way she held herself, in the way her dark eyes glittered with a light that had nothing to do with motherhood. The vision shifted, showing me other parts of the pack. Wolves lying sick in their beds, their fur falling out in patches, pups crying from hunger because there was not enough food, elders huddled around fires that gave no warmth, whispering about curses and dark omens. The land itself seemed to be dying, the forests around the settlement bare and silent, stripped of the animals that should have sustained the pack through winter. And everywhere I looked, I saw the shadow of something dark, a presence that hung over the settlement like smoke, seeping into every home and every heart. "The bargain," I whispered, understanding flooding through me. "The witch's bargain is consuming them." The mirror flickered, and suddenly I was seeing Serena alone in a chamber I did not recognize. She stood before an altar of black stone, the same altar I had seen in my dreams, and on the altar lay something that made my stomach turn. It was a bundle wrapped in white fur, and from within the bundle came a sound like the crying of an infant, but wrong somehow, distorted and echoing. Serena was speaking to the bundle, her voice sweet and coaxing, her hand stroking the white fur with a tenderness that made the horror worse. "Soon, my darling," she crooned. "The false queen is dead in the forest, and her bloodline dies with her. The covenant will break, and you will be free. Soon you will have the body you were promised, the vessel that has been prepared for you." Soon you will walk this world again, and everything will be as it should have been from the beginning." The bundle pulsed with that sickly green light I remembered from my dreams, and I understood at last what the bargain had been. Kyle's father had not simply made a deal with a witch. He had made a deal with something far worse, something old and hungry and patient, something that had been waiting for generations to claim its prize. The thing in the bundle was not a child. It was the darkness itself, waiting to be born into flesh, and Serena was its mother. I tore my hand from the mirror and staggered back, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Elara caught me before I could fall, her arms strong around me, her voice murmuring soothing words I could not process. When I finally found my voice, it came out as barely a whisper. "They are not just trying to break the covenant. They are trying to bring something through. Something terrible." Elara nodded, her golden eyes dark with ancient knowledge. The witch who made the original bargain was not simply a human who dabbled in dark magic. She was a vessel for something that exists beyond our world, a hunger that has been trying to enter the physical realm since the first guardians sealed the doorways. The bargain was never about power for Kale's bloodline. It was about opening a door that should remain forever closed. "And Serena," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Serena is the final key." Elara held me tighter. "Serena carries the vessel that will give the darkness physical form. When her child is born, the thing that waits on the other side will finally have a body to inhabit. And once it walks this world, the Guardians will be the only force capable of stopping it. Which is why they needed to destroy us first," I finished. "As long as the bloodline survives, there is hope of defeating whatever comes through." Elara released me and stepped back, her face set with the determination I had come to recognize. "The bloodline survives," she said fiercely. "It survives in you, and in the child you carry, and in the power that has awakened in your blood. They thought they were sending you to die, but instead, they sent you home. They thought they had destroyed the last guardian, but instead, they created the weapon that will destroy them." I placed my hand on my swollen belly, feeling the child move beneath my palm, feeling the power that pulsed between us like a shared heartbeat. "When spring comes," I said, my voice steady now, cold and certain, "I will go back. Not to beg for mercy, not to reclaim a place I no longer want. I will go back to finish what they started. I will go back to remind them why the Guardians were feared." Elara smiled, and in her smile I saw pride and sorrow and the fierce joy of a warrior who has finally found a worthy successor. "When spring comes," she agreed. "But first, you must give birth. And your child must be protected at any cost. Because whatever happens to you in the battle to come, the bloodline must continue. The covenant must endure." I looked down at my belly, at the life growing inside me. And I made a promise then, silent and binding, a vow that I would keep no matter what it cost. My child would live. My bloodline would endure. And the darkness that hungered for our destruction would learn that some prey was more dangerous than it appeared. The winter had 1 month left, and my child would be born before it ended. And after that, the wolves would descend from the mountains, and nothing would ever be the same. My daughter came into the world on the night of the first thaw, when the ice on the lake began to crack, and the wind carried the first faint promise of spring. I had known she would be a girl from the moment I felt her soul during the solstice ceremony, had known she would carry the mark of the Guardians and the burden of our bloodline. But knowing could not prepare me for the reality of holding her in my arms, of looking into eyes that were already turning from newborn gray to the gold of ancient power. The birth was not easy. Elara had warned me that guardian children were difficult, that the power they carried made the transition from womb to world more violent than ordinary births. She had told me stories of her own mother's labor, which had lasted 3 days and nearly killed them both, and of her grandmother's, which had required the intervention of the white wolves themselves to bring the child safely through. I had listened to these stories and tried to prepare myself, but nothing could have prepared me for the agony that tore through my body as my daughter fought her way into existence. The wolves gathered outside the tree hall as my labor began, their howls rising into the night sky like prayers to gods older than any the settled packs remembered. Elara stayed with me through every moment, her hands steady and sure as she guided me through contractions that felt like being torn apart from the inside. Fenris paced at the entrance, his scarred form a shadow against the firelight, his presence a reminder that I was protected even in my most vulnerable moment. I lost track of time as the hours stretched into an endless blur of pain and struggle. There were moments when I thought I would not survive, when the agony became so intense that I wanted to give up, to let the darkness take me, to find peace in oblivion. But every time I reached that edge, I felt my daughter's spirit touching mine, felt her fierce determination to live pushing me back from the brink. She was fighting as hard as I was, and I could not abandon her. The transformation came without warning, my body shifting into wolf form mid-contraction, the pain doubling, and then somehow becoming more bearable as my wolf self took over the process my human body could not complete. Elara changed with me, her white wolf form curling around mine, her warmth and presence anchoring me as my daughter finally emerged into the world. She was perfect, small and covered in the fluids of birth, her eyes squeezed shut against the light, her tiny mouth opening in a cry that somehow echoed through the entire valley. I cleaned her with my tongue, operating on instincts I had not known I possessed, and when she was clean, I changed back to human form so I could hold her properly, so I could count her fingers and toes and marvel at the miracle of her existence. She had a mark on her left shoulder, visible even through the downy newborn fuzz that covered her skin. The crown of antlers wound with roses, the same mark that had appeared on my fur during my first transformation, the symbol that had been etched into my childhood bed and worn around my grandmother's neck. She had been born claimed, already bound to the covenant that had defined our bloodline for countless generations. I named her Lyra, after the constellation that had been rising when she took her first breath. It was a name that meant nothing to the wolves and everything to me, a reminder that she had been born under the stars, witnessed by the heavens themselves. Elara approved of the name, saying it carried the music of the old language, the tongue that the first guardians had spoken before human words existed. The first weeks of Lyra's life were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. She fed constantly, her appetite seemingly endless, and with each feeding I could feel her power growing, feel the strength building in her tiny body. She learned to shift before she could walk, transforming into a wolf pup so white she nearly disappeared against the snow, her golden eyes bright with intelligence far beyond her days. The wolves adored her, gathering around her whenever I brought her outside, their great bodies forming a protective wall that nothing could penetrate. But even as I marveled at my daughter's growth, I could feel the outside world pressing in. The thaw continued, the snow retreating up the mountains a little more each day, the ice on the lake growing thinner and more treacherous. The passes would be clear within weeks, and once they were clear, the Shadow Silver clan would send scouts to confirm my death. They would expect to find bones, perhaps frozen flesh, certainly nothing living. What they would find instead would change everything. Elara and I spent long hours planning for that confrontation. We studied the seeing glass, watching the deterioration of the clan that had cast me out, noting the movements of patrols and the disposition of forces. The sickness I had witnessed during my first vision had grown worse, spreading through the pack like wildfire, leaving even the strongest wolves weakened and afraid. Kyle had retreated from public life, spending most of his time locked in his private chambers, emerging only for occasional ceremonies where he sat hollow-eyed on his throne while Serena conducted business in his name. Serena's pregnancy was advancing rapidly, her belly swelling larger each time I looked into the glass. the thing inside her pulsing with that sickly green light whenever she thought herself unobserved. She had taken control of the pack in all but name, issuing orders that the council dared not question, dismissing anyone who challenged her authority. The few wolves who had shown me kindness during my years as Alpha's mate had been quietly removed from positions of power, replaced by creatures who looked at Serena with the same unnatural devotion in their eyes. The darkness was already spreading, even before its vessel was born. I asked Elara once what would happen if we simply stayed in the valley, if we let the darkness emerge and consume the Shadow Silver clan without our interference. She was quiet for a long time before answering. "The darkness does not want the pack," she said finally. "The pack is merely a means to an end. What it wants is the world. The Shadow Silver clan is just the door it is using to enter. Once it has a physical form, once it walks in flesh and blood, it will not stop until everything that lives is either destroyed or enslaved to its will." The covenant the first Guardians made was not just about protecting the boundary between civilization and wild. It was about protecting our entire realm from what waits on the other side. "So we fight," I said. "Not for revenge, though I would not deny the satisfaction that would bring. We fight to save everything." "We fight," Elara agreed, "and we must win, because if we lose, there will be no one left to continue the struggle." The scouts came on the first day of true spring, when the passes finally cleared enough for wolves to travel through. I sensed them before Elara did, my enhanced awareness picking up their approach while they were still hours away. There were 3 of them, young males I had known slightly during my time in the pack, chosen no doubt for their speed and their expendability. They moved cautiously through the forest, expecting danger but not expecting what they would find. I could have let them search in vain, could have hidden in the valley until they gave up and returned with news that they had found no trace of me. But hiding was no longer in my nature. I had spent too long being small and invisible, being the quiet mate who drew no attention, being the woman who swallowed her pain and smiled through her humiliation. That woman had died in the Great Hall on the night of her exile. The one who remained was something else entirely. I left Lyra in Elara's care and went to meet the scouts alone, though I knew the white wolves were ranging through the forest around me, invisible but present, ready to intervene if necessary. I found the 3 young males at the base of the ridge where I had nearly died in the blizzard, sniffing at the ground where my scent trail had long since been buried under months of snow and new growth. They did not recognize me at first. How could they, when the woman who stood before them bore so little resemblance to the broken creature who had walked into exile all those months ago? I had filled out with muscle and power, my hair grown long and wild, my eyes transformed to the gold of the Guardians. I wore clothing made from the pelts of animals I had hunted myself, adorned with the spiraling symbols of the valley, and around my neck hung the pendant that Elara had given me on the night of Lyra's birth, the same symbol my grandmother had worn, passed down through generations of guardian women. They stared at me like men seeing a ghost, and in a way, they were. The one I remembered as Torin's younger brother spoke first, his voice shaking. "You are dead. They said you would die within days in this forest." I smiled, and I knew the expression carried nothing of warmth or welcome. As you can see, they were mistaken. The other 2 had recovered enough to spread out, attempting to flank me, their postures shifting from shock to threat. I watched them with amusement, remembering when such a display would have made me cower. Now I simply waited, letting them complete their pathetic tactical arrangement, knowing that nothing they could do would make the slightest difference. "You are trespassing in Guardian territory," I told them calmly. "This forest and everything within it falls under my protection. You have a choice. You can return to your Alpha and tell him what you have found, or you can remain here forever. I suggest you choose quickly. Guardian territory." The eldest of the 3, a wolf I remembered as a particularly ambitious enforcer, laughed without humor. "There are no guardians." The guardians are legends, stories told to frighten pups. You are nothing but a mad woman playing in the woods. I considered explaining, considered offering evidence, considered trying to convince them with words. Then I decided that some lessons were best taught through demonstration. The transformation came easily now, flowing over me like water, my body shifting from human to wolf in the space of a heartbeat. I heard their gasps, heard the youngest one cry out in terror. But I was not finished. I threw back my great white head and howled, a sound that carried across the mountains and echoed through the valleys, a call that had not been heard in these lands for generations. The white wolves answered. They came from everywhere, emerging from the shadows between trees, rising from hollows in the snow, appearing as if they had been invisible and only now chose to reveal themselves. Dozens of them, then scores, their white fur gleaming in the spring sunlight, their golden and amber eyes fixed on the three intruders who had dared to enter their domain. Fenris appeared at my side, his scarred bulk dwarfing the pack wolves, his storm-gray eyes promising violence if provocation was given. The scouts broke and ran. I let them go, knowing they would carry my message faster than any I could have sent myself. As they fled through the forest, stumbling and falling in their terror, I changed back to human form and watched them disappear into the distance. "Now they know," Fenris said, his voice entering my mind in the wordless way of the wolves. "Now the game begins in earnest." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of what I had just set in motion. Yes. Now they know that the woman they tried to destroy is still alive. Now they know that the legends their ancestors feared are not merely stories, and now they will have to decide what to do about it. We returned to the valley to find Elara waiting at the edge of the frozen lake, Lyra cradled in her arms. My daughter was awake and alert, her golden eyes tracking our approach with an intelligence that still startled me. She reached for me as I drew near, her tiny hands grasping at the air, and when I took her from Elara, I felt our connection pulse with shared awareness. "She felt what you did," Elara said. "She felt the summoning, the display of power. She is already linked to the white wolves, even at this age." I looked down at my daughter, at the mark on her shoulder that proclaimed her heritage, at the eyes that held secrets I was only beginning to understand. "She will be stronger than me," I said, "stronger than any of us." Elara nodded, her expression grave. "She will need to be. The darkness that is coming is older and more powerful than anything our bloodline has faced. If we fail to stop it now, she will inherit a world that has been twisted beyond recognition." "Then we will not fail," I said simply. The following days were filled with preparation. Scouts from the Shadow Silver clan appeared at the edge of the forbidden territory regularly now, never daring to enter but watching, always watching. I let them see the white wolves patrolling, let them glimpse the buildings of the hidden valley, let them carry back reports of impossible things to masters who had believed impossible things were safely dead. The seeing glass showed me the chaos these reports caused. The council met in emergency session, voices raised in argument and accusation. Some demanded immediate action, an army assembled to destroy the threat before it could grow. Others counseled caution, remembering the old stories, warning that the forbidden forest had been forbidden for a reason. Serena watched these debates with barely concealed impatience, her swollen belly resting on the arm of her chair, her dark eyes calculating the advantage she could extract from this unexpected development. And Kale sat through it all in silence, his hollow eyes staring at nothing, his body present but his spirit seemingly absent. I searched his face for some sign of the man I had married, some flicker of the alpha who had once led his pack with strength and wisdom. I found nothing. Whatever the darkness had done to him, whatever magic Serena had used to bend him to her will, it had left only a shell behind. Part of me grieved for him still. I could not help it, could not erase the years of memories, the moments of genuine connection before everything fell apart. But the grief was small now. buried under layers of new purpose and ancient power. I had been remade in the crucible of the forbidden forest, forged into something harder and sharper than the woman who had loved him. That woman's heart had been soft enough to break. This one's heart was steel. The final confrontation came closer with each passing day. Serena's pregnancy was entering its final stages, the thing inside her growing impatient, pressing against the barrier that separated its hunger from the physical world. Through the seeing glass, I watched her conduct rituals in the underground chamber, watched her feed the darkness power stolen from the weakening pack, watched her prepare for a birth that would either doom the world or be prevented by forces she had believed destroyed. "She does not know what she carries," Elara observed during one of our viewing sessions. "She believes she is birthing a child who will be possessed by the darkness, a vessel it will inhabit while remaining bound by normal physical limitations. But the darkness has been deceiving her all along. What emerges from her womb will not be a child wearing a shadow. It will be the shadow itself made flesh, unlimited and unstoppable." "What will happen to her?" I asked. "When she realizes the truth?" Elara's golden eyes were cold. "She will be consumed. She was always meant to be consumed. The darkness does not share power. It only takes." I should have felt satisfaction at that, some sense of justice in knowing that the woman who had stolen my mate and orchestrated my exile would face a fate worse than anything I could have devised. But I felt only sorrow. The deep grief of watching someone destroy themselves in pursuit of something that was never real. Serena had wanted power, had sacrificed everything to obtain it, and in the end she would discover that what she had bargained for was her own annihilation. The visions came more frequently now, flooding my dreams every night, sometimes breaking through even in my waking hours. I saw futures that might be, branches of possibility spreading from the moment that was approaching like lightning from a central strike. In some branches I triumphed, standing over the darkness's ruined vessel with my daughter in my arms, and the white wolves howling victory behind me. In others I fell, my blood soaking into snow that would never thaw, Lyra screaming in the arms of a wolf who was already dying, and in the darkest visions, the ones that woke me gasping and drenched in sweat, I saw the darkness win. I saw it spread across the land like a stain, corrupting everything it touched, transforming the world into a realm of eternal hunger and despair. I saw Lyra grown to a woman, fighting a war she could not win, sacrificing herself to buy time for a resistance that was already doomed. I saw the end of everything, the final silence, the void that waited when all other things had been devoured. These visions drove me harder than any training could have, pushed me to master every skill Elara could teach, to forge connections with the white wolves that went beyond anything a guardian had achieved in living memory. I practiced my transformations until they were instantaneous, learned to hold partial shifts that gave me wolf strength in human form, discovered that I could extend my awareness through the entire territory of the Forbidden Forest, feeling every creature and every disturbance as if they were part of my own body. And I prepared Lyra, as much as an infant could be prepared for the storm that was coming. I fed her not just milk, but power, letting the energy of the covenant flow through me into her, building the foundation she would need if I was not there to guide her growth. The white wolves took turns guarding her, bonding with her in ways that would last beyond my lifetime, ensuring that she would never be alone no matter what happened in the battle ahead. On the night before I left the valley, I sat with Elara beside the eternal fire in the tree hall, Lyra sleeping peacefully in a cradle Fenris had carved from a fallen branch of the great tree. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a long time neither of us spoke. "I do not know if I will return," I finally said. "The visions show too many possibilities, and I cannot see which one is real." Elara reached over and took my hand, her grip warm and strong. "The visions show what might be, not what must be. You have the power to choose your path, to shape the outcome through your actions. That is the gift and the burden of being a guardian. And if I fall? I asked. If the darkness proves too strong. Then Lyra will continue the fight, Elara said. And I will be here to guide her, as I have guided you. The covenant does not end with one defeat, Elara. It endures as long as one guardian remains to uphold it. I looked at my daughter, at her peaceful face and her small hands curled into fists even in sleep. She had been born into war, would grow up in its shadow, might spend her entire life fighting battles that should never have been hers to fight. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but beneath the anger was something else, a fierce pride in what she would become, in the strength I could already see developing in her tiny form. She will be magnificent, I said softly. Whatever happens tomorrow, she will grow into something the world has never seen. Elara squeezed my hand and smiled, and in her smile I saw centuries of guardians who had faced impossible odds and found ways to prevail. She is her mother's daughter, she said. How could she be anything less? I left the valley at dawn, the white wolves streaming behind me like a river of snow come to life. Fenris ran at my side, his scarred body moving with a grace that belied his size, his storm-gray eyes fixed on the horizon where destiny waited. The forest seemed to part before us, branches moving aside, snow melting beneath our paws, as if the land itself was speeding us toward the confrontation it had been anticipating since the first bargain was struck in darkness. Behind me, in the valley that had become my sanctuary, Elara held my daughter and watched us go. I did not look back. I could not afford to look back. The path ahead demanded everything I had, every scrap of power and determination and courage I could muster. The Shadow Silver clan did not know I was coming, but they were about to learn that some exiles return as conquerors, and some broken women rise as queens. The smell of sickness reached me before the settlement came into view, a wrongness in the air that made my wolf senses recoil even as my human mind catalogued the symptoms. Decay and desperation, fear, sweat, and dying hope, the unmistakable signature of a pack that had been poisoned from within. I had seen glimpses of this deterioration through the seeing glass, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of experiencing it firsthand. We emerged from the forest at midday, when the sun was high enough to illuminate our approach without casting the dramatic shadows of dawn or dusk. I wanted them to see us clearly, wanted there to be no confusion about what was descending upon them. The white wolves spread out behind me in a formation that spoke of discipline and deadly intent, their fur gleaming like fresh snow, their eyes catching the light like scattered stars. Fenris walked at my right hand, his scarred bulk a promise of violence held in check, and I walked at the center of it all in my human form, wearing the silver and white of the guardians, the crown of antlers and roses resting on my brow. The sentries saw us first. I watched their faces cycle through recognition, disbelief, and terror in the space of heartbeats. They knew me, these wolves who had stood in the great hall and watched me be humiliated and cast out. They had probably laughed about it afterward, had certainly dismissed me from their thoughts as quickly as they would forget a disappointing hunt. Now they stared at the woman they had written off as dead, the woman who had returned with an army of legends at her back, and they understood that everything they thought they knew was about to change. One of them ran toward the settlement, presumably to raise the alarm. The other stood frozen, his legs apparently refusing to carry him either toward danger or away from it. I walked past him without acknowledgement, my wolves flowing around his trembling form like water around a stone. He was not worth my attention. None of them were, except for the ones who had orchestrated my destruction and the darkness they served. The alarm spread through the settlement like fire through dry grass. Wolves poured from buildings, some armed and ready to fight, others clearly just woken from sleep, all of them stopping in their tracks when they saw what approached. I heard gasps and screams and prayers to gods who had stopped listening to this pack long ago. I heard my name spoken in whispers that carried equal parts fear and wonder, and beneath it all, I heard something else. A thrumming in the earth, a pulse of dark energy that told me Serena's labor had already begun. The timing could not have been coincidence. The darkness had felt me coming and had accelerated its own emergence, trying to birth itself into flesh before I could intervene. We were racing now, and the prize was nothing less than the fate of everything that lived. I quickened my pace, the white wolves matching me step for step, and the crowd of pack wolves parted before us, like the sea before a storm wind. No one tried to stop us. No one dared. Whatever loyalty they might have felt toward their alpha or his mate evaporated in the face of power they could not comprehend. They had lived too long under the shadow of the darkness, had been weakened too thoroughly by its parasitic feeding, and now they could only watch as ancient forces collided in their midst. The great hall loomed ahead, the same building where I had been stripped of my bond and my dignity, where my old life had ended in public shame. I felt no tremor of painful memory as I approached it now. That place held no power over me anymore. I had been reborn in ice and fire, forged in the crucible of the forbidden forest, and the woman who had wept in these shadows was as distant as a half-remembered dream. The doors stood open, and I walked through them without slowing. The hall had changed since my exile. The decorations that had once celebrated the pack's history and achievements had been replaced with hangings of black and green, symbols I recognized from Elara's teachings as marks of the darkness's influence. The eternal fire that had burned at the center of the space had been extinguished, replaced by a cold hearth that seemed to swallow light rather than produce it. And at the far end, on the raised platform where Kale had pronounced my sentence, a tableau awaited that would have frozen the blood of anyone who did not know what they were seeing. Serena lay on a bed of black furs, her body convulsing with contractions that came too fast and too hard to be natural. Her face was a mask of agony and ecstasy. Her dark eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, her lips moving in words that were not any human language. Around her stood figures in robes that matched the hangings on the walls, their faces hidden, their hands raised in gestures that channeled power I could feel pressing against my skin like oily water. And Kale stood beside her, his hand clasped in hers, his hollow eyes staring at nothing while his mate screamed, and the thing inside her fought to be born. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something crack in the armor I had built around my heart. He looked so broken, so utterly destroyed, a puppet whose strings had been cut but who remained standing only because he had forgotten how to fall. The man I had loved was gone, perhaps had been gone for longer than I had known him, replaced by this empty vessel that moved and breathed but held nothing of the spirit that had once drawn me to him. Then Serena screamed again, and the crack in my armor sealed itself with steel. Whatever Kale had been, whatever he might have become under different circumstances, he had made choices that led to this moment. He had chosen to believe lies over truth, to cast me out rather than question the whispers in his ear, to stand beside the woman who carried destruction in her womb rather than fight the darkness that had claimed his soul. Pity him I might, but save him I could not. Some wounds were beyond even a guardian's power to heal. The robed figures noticed me first, their hidden faces turning toward the entrance as the white wolves flowed into the hall behind me. I saw their postures shift from confidence to uncertainty, saw them exchange glances that communicated fear without words. They had been promised that the guardian bloodline was extinct, that nothing could stop the emergence of their master. Now they faced the evidence that they had been deceived, and the foundation of their faith was crumbling beneath their feet. "Stop her!" Serena gasped, her voice barely human, twisted by the thing that was tearing its way out of her. "Stop her before it is too late." The robed figures moved to obey, but they were too slow, too weak, too thoroughly corrupted by the darkness they served. The white wolves fell upon them like an avalanche, silent and deadly and utterly without mercy. I did not watch the slaughter. My attention was fixed on the platform, on the woman who writhed in agony, on the man who stood beside her like a statue of everything I had lost. I climbed the steps to the platform, and with each step I felt the darkness pressing harder against me, trying to force me back, trying to overwhelm my senses with its ancient hunger. It knew what I was now. It recognized the blood that flowed in my veins, the power that blazed in my golden eyes, the crown that rested on my brow. It had spent generations trying to destroy my bloodline, and here I stood, alive and powerful and utterly unafraid. "You should be dead," Serena hissed, her voice layered with something deeper and darker than human vocal cords could produce. I made sure of it. I watched them send you into the forest to die. You watched them deliver me to my destiny, I replied, my voice calm and cold and carrying the weight of everything I had become. You thought you were destroying me, but instead, you awakened something that should have terrified you from the beginning. The Guardians remember everything, Serena. We remember the first bargain, the first betrayal, and we remember how to collect debts that have been owed for generations. Her face twisted into something that was not quite a smile and not quite a snarl. It does not matter. Look at me. The vessel is almost complete. In moments, my Lord will walk this world in flesh, and your pathetic guardians will be swept away like leaves in a storm. I looked at her swollen belly, at the sickly green light that pulsed beneath her skin, at the way her body was literally tearing itself apart to birth something that was never meant to exist in physical form. And I felt, beneath my determination and my power and my righteous fury, a flicker of genuine sorrow for the woman she might have been if ambition had not consumed her. You still do not understand, I said softly. You think you are birthing a child who will be possessed by your Lord, a vessel he will wear while remaining bound by mortal limitations. But the darkness has been lying to you from the beginning. What comes out of you will not be a child wearing a shadow. It will be the shadow itself, and the first thing it will do is consume the woman foolish enough to give it flesh. For a single instant, I saw doubt flicker in Serena's eyes. Then the contraction took her again, and she screamed, and the green light blazed so bright that it seemed to burn away shadows that should not have existed in a sunlit hall. The darkness emerged. It was not a child, not really, though it wore the form of an infant for the first heartbeats of its existence. It was hunger given shape, void given substance, everything wrong and empty and devouring compressed into a body that grew even as it drew its first breath. I watched it expand from newborn to child to something larger, its form shifting and changing as it fed on everything around it, drawing the life from the robed figures the wolves had left alive, from the pack members who had crept into the hall to witness what was happening, from Serena herself, who reached for it with arms that were already withering. "Mother," the darkness said, and its voice was a chorus of stolen screams. "Thank you for your service." Serena had time to understand, I think. In the final moment before the darkness consumed her entirely, I saw recognition dawn in her dying eyes, saw her realize that she had been played from the very beginning, that every scheme and manipulation and cruelty had been leading to this moment when she became nothing more than fuel for the thing she had thought to control. Then she was gone, her body collapsing into dust that scattered on a wind that came from nowhere, and the darkness stood in her place wearing a form that was almost human, but would never be mistaken for one. It turned to face me, and I saw infinity in its eyes, saw the hunger that had been gnawing at the edges of reality since before my bloodline began. It smiled with a mouth that contained too many teeth, and when it spoke I felt the words resonating in my bones. "The last guardian," it said. "I have been waiting for this moment longer than your species has existed. Your ancestors sealed me away, built their precious covenant to keep me from this world. Now you stand alone against everything they feared, and you will fail as all mortal things must fail." I did not answer with words. Instead, I reached for the power that had been building in my blood since the night Elara placed the crown upon my brow, the power that connected me to every guardian who had come before, to the land itself, to the white wolves who had served my bloodline since the first covenant was struck. I called it all to me, drew it up from the earth and down from the sky, and out of the loyal wolves who stood ready to die at my command. The power answered, flooding into me until I blazed with light that matched the darkness's hungry void. The collision when we struck was like nothing that had ever occurred in this world. Light and shadow, creation and consumption, everything and nothing meeting in a contest that shook the foundations of the Great Hall and sent cracks racing through stone walls that had stood for centuries. I felt the darkness trying to devour me, felt its ancient hunger wrapping around my soul and pulling, trying to unmake me the way it had unmade countless others throughout its eternal existence. I felt my defenses crumbling, felt myself being worn away, grain by grain, against the grinding patience of the void. But I was not alone. Through the bond I shared with the white wolves, I felt them adding their strength to mine. Through the connection to my bloodline, I felt the spirits of every guardian who had ever lived rising to stand beside me. And through the link to my daughter, safe in the valley with Elara, I felt Lyra's fierce young power blazing like a star, a promise of everything that would come after me, a reminder of why I was fighting and what I was protecting. The darkness faltered. It had expected to face a single guardian, weakened by exile and childbirth, alone against an enemy that had destroyed her entire bloodline. Instead, it faced the accumulated power of generations, channeled through a woman who had been broken and remade, who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain, who would not stop fighting until either the darkness was destroyed or she was. I pressed the advantage, driving my power into the heart of the shadow, seeking the core of its existence, the seed from which its hunger grew. I found it buried beneath layers of stolen life and consumed souls, a knot of wrongness that pulsed with malevolent awareness. And I did what the first guardians had been too merciful to do, what my ancestors had sealed away rather than destroy. I reached into that core and I unmade it. The darkness screamed, not with a voice but with its entire being, a sound that was the absence of sound, a cry that was felt rather than heard. It thrashed against me, desperate now, its eternal patience shattered by the realization that it was dying, actually dying, being erased from existence by the descendants of the women it had spent millennia trying to destroy. It clawed at me with weapons made of pure void, and I felt them tearing at my body, felt my strength beginning to fail, felt the price of what I was doing measured in blood and pain and the very substance of my soul. But I did not stop. I could not stop. The faces of my grandmother and mother flashed before me, the women who had died to keep me safe, who had given everything so that I might stand in this moment and finish what they had started. I felt Lyra's presence burning in my heart, the daughter who would carry our bloodline forward, who deserved a world free from this ancient hunger. And I felt, beneath all of it, the land itself crying out for release from the corruption that had been spreading from this place for generations. The darkness shattered. It came apart like ice in spring, fragments of shadow scattering and dissolving, the hungry void collapsing in on itself as the core I had destroyed took the rest of its existence with it. The scream that had been a presence became an echo, became a whisper, became nothing at all. And then it was gone, truly gone, erased from reality as if it had never existed. I collapsed. The power that had sustained me through the confrontation drained away, leaving me hollow and broken on the floor of the great hall. I could not move, could barely breathe, every inch of my body screaming with pain that went beyond the physical. I had given everything I had pushed past limits that should have been unbreakable, and now I was paying the price. But I was alive, and the darkness was not. The white wolves gathered around me, their warm bodies pressing close, their tongues lapping at wounds I had not realized I had sustained. Fenris's great scarred head appeared in my vision, his storm-gray eyes filled with something that might have been pride, or might have been grief, or might have been both. "You did it," his voice said in my mind. "The covenant is restored. The darkness is gone." I tried to speak, tried to ask about the pack, About Kale, about everything that had happened in the moments after my battle with the void. But my voice would not come, and the darkness I slipped into was soft and welcoming, carrying me away from pain into a peace I had not known I needed. I woke in the valley, in the bed where Lyra had been born, with my daughter sleeping peacefully in the crook of my arm. Elara sat beside me, her golden eyes watching my face with an expression of profound relief. "You have been unconscious for 3 days," she said when she saw that I was awake. "We brought you back as soon as the battle was over. The wolves carried you through the passes while I kept you alive with everything I had. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. My body felt like it had been torn apart and reassembled incorrectly, every joint aching, every muscle screaming. But beneath the pain, I felt something else, a lightness I had not experienced in longer than I could remember. The darkness was gone. Its weight, its pressure, the constant sense of wrongness that had pressed against my awareness since I first developed my powers. All of it had vanished. Elara helped me sit, propping pillows behind my back, handling me as if I were made of fragile glass. Lyra stirred at the movement, her golden eyes opening to find mine, her small face breaking into a smile that made all the pain worthwhile. "The Shadow Silver Clan," I managed to rasp. "What happened?" Elara's expression grew complicated. The darkness took many of them when it emerged, fed on their life force to fuel its manifestation. More died in the battle, caught between forces they did not understand. Those who survived are in chaos. "They're alpha," she hesitated, then continued. "Kale lives, but he is not what he was. When the darkness was destroyed, whatever hold it had on him was broken, but the breaking did not restore what had been taken. He is like a man who has woken from a long nightmare to find that everything he knew is ash and ruin." I closed my eyes, absorbing this information. Part of me had hoped that freeing Kale from the darkness would reveal the man I had once loved, would offer some chance at redemption, or at least understanding. But I had known, even as I hoped, that some damage could not be undone. He had been too long in the shadow's grip, too thoroughly corrupted by its influence. Whatever remained of him now was not enough to rebuild what we had lost. "And the pack itself?" I asked. "What will become of them?" Elara smiled, and in her smile I saw the answer before she spoke it. "They need a leader, someone strong enough to rebuild what has been destroyed, wise enough to guide them back from the edge of annihilation. Several of the elders have already sent word to the valley, asking the guardian to take her rightful place among them." I opened my eyes and stared at her. "They want me to lead them. The same wolves who watched me be humiliated and cast out, who believed every lie told about me, who would have let me die without a second thought." "They were deceived," Elara said gently. "The darkness had been working on them for generations, twisting their perceptions, feeding their worst impulses. They are not blameless, but they are not entirely guilty either. And they need someone who can show them what they should be, what they could become if they choose a different path." I looked down at Lyra, at her perfect face and her golden eyes and the mark on her shoulder that proclaimed her heritage. She would grow up in this world, would inherit whatever I built or failed to build. The choice I made now would shape her future as surely as the choice to fight the darkness had shaped my past. "I do not want revenge," I said slowly, testing the words as they left my mouth. "I wanted it once. When they cast me out, when I was dying in the snow, I dreamed of making them suffer for what they had done to me. But that woman is gone. What remains wants something different." "What do you want?" Elara asked. I thought about it carefully before answering, feeling the weight of the question, the importance of getting it right. "I want to build something that will last," I finally said. "I want to create a pack where no woman is ever valued only for her ability to produce heirs. I want to forge alliances between the settlements and the wild places, between the wolves who have forgotten the old ways and the white wolves who remember everything. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where the darkness can never return, where the covenant is honored, where the guardians are not legends but living protectors. I lifted my eyes to meet Elara's, and I saw the ancient guardian smile with an approval that warmed me more than any fire. "Then go and build it," she said. "The valley will always be here for you, and I will watch over Lyra whenever you need to attend to your duties beyond the mountains. But you were not reborn in fire and ice to hide in sanctuary, Elara. You were reborn to lead." I returned to the Shadow Silver territory a week later, when my body had healed enough to make the journey without the wolves having to carry me. The white wolves came with me, though not in the numbers that had accompanied my first return. This was not an invasion, but a homecoming, not a conquest, but a restoration. The pack that greeted me was a shadow of what it had been. So many had died, so many had fled, so many were still too sick from the darkness's long feeding to stand on their own. But those who remained gathered in the great hall where I had been exiled, gathered to witness the woman they had cast out take her place on the platform where their alpha had condemned her. Kyle was not there. I had been told he had withdrawn to a cabin at the edge of the territory, had refused to speak to anyone, had spent his days staring at nothing and his nights screaming from nightmares that would not end. Part of me wanted to go to him, to offer what comfort I could, to help him find some peace after everything that had been done to him and that he had done. But I knew that my presence would only make things worse, that I represented everything he had lost and everything he had failed to protect. He would have to find his own way back to himself, if such a path even existed. I stood before the assembled wolves and spoke words I had not planned, words that came from somewhere deeper than thought. "I was cast out from this place," I said. "I was called barren and worthless, stripped of my bond and sent into the forest to die. You watched it happen. Some of you believed the lies. Some of you knew the truth and said nothing. All of you let me walk into exile without a single voice raised in my defense. I let the silence stretch. Let them feel the weight of their complicity. I could punish you for that. I have the power now, and some would say I have the right. But punishment would not undo what was done. It would not bring back the woman I was before that night. And it would not build the future I want for my daughter, for all our daughters, for the generations that will come after us." I looked out at the faces before me, seeing fear and hope and shame and something that might have been the beginning of trust. "I offer you instead a choice. Follow me, and I will lead you into a new era. The covenant will be restored. The white wolves will walk among you as allies, not legends. The old ways will be remembered, and the darkness that poisoned your bloodline for 3 generations will never touch you again. Or refuse, and I will let you go in peace to find your own path. But know that if you choose to follow, I will expect more from you than any alpha has demanded before. I will expect you to question the whispers in your ears. I will expect you to value truth over convenience, courage over safety, compassion over ambition. I will expect you to become worthy of the protection I offer." One by one, they knelt. Not all of them, not at first, but enough. And in the days that followed, more joined, drawn by the promise of something better than the slow decay they had endured under the darkness's shadow. The first year was the hardest. Rebuilding a pack that had been gutted by corruption and loss required more patience than I had known I possessed. There were moments when I wanted to give up, to take Lyra and return to the valley and let the Shadow Silver wolves find their own way to survival or extinction. But Elara's words echoed in my mind whenever the temptation grew too strong. I had not been reborn to hide. So I stayed, and I worked, and slowly the pack began to heal. New alliances formed with neighboring territories. The white wolves ranged through the forest, their presence a reminder of the covenant's protection and the price of breaking it. Young wolves were trained in the old ways, taught to honor the balance between civilization and wild that the guardians had maintained since the beginning of memory. And Lyra grew. She grew faster than any child had a right to, her powers manifesting earlier and stronger than even Elara had predicted. By her first birthday, she could transform at will, could speak to the white wolves as easily as breathing, could sense the health of the forest for miles in every direction. She was everything I had hoped she would be and more, the promise of a future bright enough to burn away the shadows of the past. On the anniversary of my exile, I stood at the edge of the forbidden forest and looked back at the territory I now led. Behind me, invisible in the trees, the white wolves waited. Before me, the settlement that had cast me out sprawled in the afternoon sunlight, no longer sick and dying, but growing and thriving, its people learning to be worthy of the second chance they had been given. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, pregnant and terrified, walking into a death sentence with nothing but the child in her belly and the clothes on her back. I thought about everything she had lost and everything she had gained, the transformation from discarded mate to alpha queen, from victim to victor, from broken to whole. She was gone now, that woman, replaced by someone stronger, someone fiercer, someone who had faced the darkness at the heart of existence and emerged triumphant. But I carried her memory with me, a reminder of where I had started and how far I had come. She deserved to be remembered. She had survived long enough to become me. Lyra appeared at my side, her small hand finding mine, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. She did not speak, did not need to. The bond between us said everything that words could not. Together, we turned and walked back toward the settlement, toward the pack that waited for our return, toward the future we were building with every choice and every day. The darkness was gone, the covenant was restored, and the guardian bloodline would endure for generations to come, protecting the balance, honoring the old ways, standing between the world and everything that sought to consume it. I had been sent into exile to die. Instead, I had found my destiny, and I had become exactly what they feared I would become. The Alpha Queen had come home,